Welcome in to the Illini Inquirer podcast. It's been a while since we have caught up with you, and we apologize for that, but we needed some time off. Kyle Tausk got away for about a week. I got away, much needed, for about a week and a half with the family down in Florida. Kyle was out on the beach as well. Joey was holding down the fort. Kyle did a lot of content. I did a little bit while I was on vacation, but thanks for dealing with us. I know it's been a while since we've had a podcast, but it was the perfect time to do it. It's a little bit slower time in July, but there's plenty going on. Illinois basketball, we started their workouts. Brad Underwood caught up with the media yesterday or last week, excuse me. So we'll catch up on some of that. We will break down the top storylines. Kyle Tausk and I breaking down what we think of this 2026-27 roster. NBA Summer League starts this week. The live period is now live. Basketball recruiting in full gear. So we are going to catch up on it all right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast. Stay tuned. It's coming up next. Welcome into this live edition of the Illini Inquirer podcast. It is Jeremy Werner and Kyle Tausk. We are back. We're a little bit more tan, maybe a little bit more rested. I would argue, Kyle, when you go on vacation with a 9 and 7-year-old and entertaining them, it's not as refreshing, but there are certainly a lot of memories to be made. I had a great time. Got to read finally my John Adams biography that I've been looking to get to. Awesome, by the way. Started another book. I actually get to read when I go on vacation a little bit. But Kyle, you got to head to the beach as well, man. You relaxed, you're refreshed, you ready to go?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pretty awesome week. Got down to the Virgin Islands, stayed on St. Thomas. It was my first time in the Caribbean, and boy, is that a beautiful place. I mean, just the waters, the beaches are unbelievable. Got a lot of time to just relax on a beach for a week, which was much needed. It was not planned that me and you were going to have our vacations at the exact same time. I think I actually planned this one before I even met you.
That's right.
It's been a long time coming, but sure enough, Brad Underwood had to meet with the media right when both of us left. So shout out to Joey Wagner for covering that for us. But no, it was a good week. Feel refreshed, feel ready to start diving back into hoops, summer league action that I'll be curious to watch here coming up. But not too far in the future, we'll start really getting some real summer buzz and start feeling like basketball season is around the corner. So I'm pumped up about it.
I was in St. Thomas at Megan's Bay probably before you were born, Kyle. I was a senior in high school, so that was probably before you were born. One of the most beautiful places in the world. Some of the best beaches in the world. While you were doing that, I was somewhere in Legoland probably, but I got some time in Fort Myers Beach, which is one of my favorite places as well. I got to spend a lot of time with my mom, and the kids got to hang out with her. So it was a great time. But I encourage everybody. Kyle might have been on vacation, but he was putting out some content, man. The player outlooks, I highly encourage everyone to go check those out. He's had some good ones so far on David Mirkovic, Tomislav Ivasic, Andrei Stojakovic, Stefan Vaaks. Actually, I've learned, I got to correct myself, Stefan is the pronunciation. Derek Burson passed that on to me the other day. Stefan Vaaks, obviously a huge piece that we'll talk about as we break down the top storylines of summer. But if you want to get ready for this 2026-27 roster, I highly encourage you to check out the VIP player outlooks that Kyle has been putting together. It's been a great kind of reset for what this roster is going to be. So we will break down our top summer storylines. You'll hear a little bit from Brad Underwood and what he had to tell Joey Wagner and all the reporters that were not on vacation last week. But the Summer League does start this week, Kyle, and he had a really good piece on that. It's a free one up on the website. Go check it out. You can see the schedule of the Vegas Summer League, which starts tonight, and see when the Illini play. But there are a lot of former Illini, Kyle. You had 12, including some guys who had transferred out. But I think it's a sign of all the talent that Brad Underwood has brought into this program. But obviously, Keaton Wagler is the headliner. To see him in an NBA jersey, albeit a Summer League jersey, it's going to be fun to watch him on a Clippers franchise that is now retooling, right? Like, this is a rebuild for the Clippers now, with Kawhi Leonard getting traded back to Toronto. So it could be Wagler but who are you most interested of the former Illini participating in Summer League? Who are you most interested to watch the next week?
I do think Wagler is definitely near the top of the list, especially when you look at the potential matchups that we could see him face off against. He's going to face off against Darius Acuff and the Kings here tonight at 10 o'clock on ESPN. And then you look down in those 4 games that the Clippers are going to play, and you could potentially see Darren Peterson and the Jazz, and then AJ DeBonce and the Wizards, if those guys play throughout the week, which isn't necessarily a guarantee for these top guys. But that'll be really fun. And just to see him, because he is going to be one of the bigger stars in Summer League. Like, this is the number 5 pick. This is a guy that has a lot of hype around him coming into the league for good reason. He's earned that, but now you'll get to see him. It should be the Keaton Wagler show for this Clippers summer team, because it's not a team that has more first-round picks or guys that were in the NBA rotation last year other than Kobe Sanders, who got a little bit of time. So Wagler should have the ball in his hand, should have a chance to kind of star this week. That'll be fun. I'm really excited, though, to see year 2 for Kasparas Giacochonis and Will Riley. I think it's a big summer for both those guys in different ways. For Kasparas, first chance to see him with the Bucks, who are starting to build up a pretty intriguing young core now after that Giannis trade. He'll be playing with Braden Burries, Nate Ament, pretty good summer team there. But this is a big year for Kasparas in a new place, a guy that the Bucks sought out in that deal, a guy that should get more opportunity now, especially as a primary creator, to have the ball in his hands a little bit more in Milwaukee, both this summer, which I'm sure he'll have plenty of reps to do, but also once you get into the NBA season. And then Will Riley with the Wizards. It's fascinating to look at this Wizards roster with how many young wings are on it. It's really crowded. Like, it's one of the worst teams in the NBA last year. Will Riley was really good down the stretch, but there's a lot of competition for Will. So it's a big summer for him to continue to establish himself among the likes of AJ DeBonce, Kaishan George, Bilal Coulibaly, who was a first-round pick a couple years ago. Now you got Chris Middleton in the mix, Trey Johnson. Like, there's just a glut of young talent there that Will Riley really kind of broke out towards the end of last year. But I think a strong summer would go a long way for him continuing to push into that group. So I'm excited for year 2 for both those guys. I think it'll be important for those guys to have a nice summer going into the fall.
Yeah, to hit on those guys, I'm a KJ believer. Like, I know he had his downs at Illinois, especially late in his career, but I just think that skill set translates to the NBA, and we saw his efficiency off the ball really take a big step. And I don't think it's all handed to him in Milwaukee. He's going to have to earn it, but this is a huge opportunity for him to maybe play on the ball a little bit for a team that's not going to be competitive all that much. They're going to try to be out of that relegation zone, the bottom 3, but he's got a great opportunity, and you want to see him kind of continue some of that efficiency success. But Will Riley, my take is, like, I don't know if Will Riley and the Wizards are a long-term pairing, but the Wizards made a good pick because he's already proven himself as an NBA level scorer. I think it might be off the bench for a really, really good team. But I think he's really needs to continue to showcase himself for that next team, that next deal potentially, because it's going to be hard with the Banta and some of those guys that you were mentioned. Trey Johnson was a very high draft pick, but maybe he does stick around with the Wizards. Maybe it's another team, but I think last year was a great start to him showing himself as an NBA player. The 2 other guys I'm really interested in is Colin Boswell signs a 2-way deal. Didn't know if that was going to be for sure. It's nothing guaranteed. Doesn't mean he'll be with the Charlotte Hornets for a long time. But without LaMelo Ball, there's a chance there to hang around that franchise. And, if an injury happens, potentially get called up to the big club and show what he can do. We know what Colin Boswell can do. Now, can he show that he can shoot the ball more consistently is the big question for him, because he hasn't done it for 2 years. But the other guy that's really interesting to me is Ben Rickhouse, man. 15 points in the Summer League game. Was that in Utah or California? One of the two. But yeah, like, he's got NBA size. We saw last year him round out his game to where he can defend, and I think he can hold his own, at least in the NBA. But if he can shoot 38+%, Kyle, you can find a way to get yourself to the NBA. And we've seen so many guys that might not be the best athletes, that might not be the best defenders, that find their way to the NBA as shooters that are dependable. Like a Max Strus comes to mind. Like, there's just guys that find their way into the NBA. So Ben's an older guy. Like, I don't know if it's going to be an easy path for him, but I'm just intrigued to see what he can do in the Summer League. And if he can find his way to a 2-way deal with some team, I think he'd like to try a year or two to kind of make the NBA and before he tries to go over to Europe. But Europe will always be here for him, and I think he'll have a long professional career. But I'm interested to see if he can make a case for an NBA two-way deal.
Yeah, I mean, he is intriguing because I think he'll be able to shoot it at a good enough clip. And I know it was inconsistent at Illinois, but that's something that we know he can do very well. He's already shown that this summer. But it is rare to have a guy of his size at 6'9" that the way that he remade his game at Illinois, the way that he showed he can be switchable defensively, be able to guard multiple positions, and really improved as a rebounder too. Like 6'9" with that shooting ability and that versatility, that is somebody that NBA teams will have eyes on. Does that mean that he'll play an NBA minute or he'll ultimately earn a two-way contract or make a roster at some point? Who knows? But that's somebody that I think will float around the NBA stratosphere because that's a skill set that's pretty hard to find. And if he has a big summer, I think he will earn, whether that's just an opportunity to be with the Nets G League team next year and earn another opportunity during the summer, or just like you said, a cup of coffee could be available for him somewhere. And if ultimately he does decide to go pursue a career overseas, I think that could be a very fruitful path for him if he continues to show himself. So I think it'll be big for him and for Kylan too. He's got a little bit more security than Ben would being on a two-way deal, but still for him, with Charlotte, I think there is an opportunity for him because you look at the guard depth that Charlotte has right now. Like they don't have a lot of like point guard ball handling depth within their organization right now. After losing LaMelo Ball, you have Christian Anderson, who they drafted in the first round. Then you have Kobe White, who just re-signed Trey Mann, who's kind of a combo guard. But like there is kind of an opportunity for Kylan to potentially get a crack with the NBA team at some point as part of that two-way deal. And obviously he'll get a chance in the G League, but I think proving himself during the summer will go a long way for that. Has to shoot it. That's it. I mean, when you talk about Kylan Boswell's NBA future, he's got to be able to make threes because at his size, you just have to be able to do that, or I don't think you'll have much of a chance in the NBA. So that'll be the biggest thing to watch for him. Can he shoot it at a consistent enough clip from three to really earn an opportunity?
And he knows it. At the NBA Combine, he said, "I'd like to find my effing shot." he's frustrated with it too, so he knows like he's got to bring that along with the stuff we know he can do: rebound, defend, and be a leader of a team. All right, Kyle, the other thing that's happening right now, the July eval period has started. There's 2 live periods, one that runs for the next 4 days and another one July 16th through the 19th. I have a piece up at IlliniInquirer.com on the VIP side of things, 5 targets that are really interesting to watch, including a pair of 5-star guards, an in-state sleeper, and some other guys that they're looking at. So go check that out at IlliniInquirer.com. If you're not a VIP member, 50% off right now. But we talked a year ago to Brad Underwood at the Kendall Gill golf outing, which is Monday, by the way, for people. I don't know if you can still sign up, but it's always a great event. And he kind of didn't know where prep recruiting kind of figured in. Well, Kyle, he signed 6 prep recruits this past class in the class of 2026. They already have 2 commits in the class of 2027, and Mason Martin and Quentin Kitt. So how much does this matter? Because it's not as significant. I mean, we are not covering this as breathlessly as when Derek Piper and I started Illini Inquirer. That was like our main thing that we did. Now the transfer portal, European imports, pay for play has just changed the game in so many ways, but roster building has changed. Yet it feels like the pendulum's shifting a little bit more towards, at least for Illinois, the development side. They really want to keep some guys in the program and some guys who are bought in, that have skill sets, that have size, that aren't as expensive. That's a huge key of this, because your top 8's going to get most of the money, just like in the NBA. And then you need some cheaper guys that are not just culture guys, but guys that could develop into contributors down the line. So what do you see? How does prep recruiting figure into roster building nowadays? Because Peach Jam, July evaluation period used to be the thing we used to cover in college basketball. And now it feels like it's just like, oh, yeah, it's here.
I certainly think that this period over the next 2 weeks matters, because I think for Illinois, there is still going to be a lot of evaluation going on. I will point out that you look at the guys that Illinois brought in last year: Lucas Murillo, offered by Illinois on July 12th of 2025. Quentin Coleman, offered by Illinois on July 22nd, 2025. So this is still a big period of evaluation, figuring out, kind of putting your board together, figuring out kind of where you want to go with your plan
Ethan
of
Brown.
building next year's class. Yeah,
Ethan Brown was offered in July. Landon Davis,
right.
maybe August, right? So
Yeah,
it was right in this time.
yeah, and you ended up getting those guys on board in early August, and I think for Illinois, it's following a pretty similar path with this class that it did to the last class, to where you have 2 in-state commits already in Quentin Kitt and Mason Martin, much like you got. Now, you got those guys on board earlier than you did Landon Davis and Ethan Brown, but you kind of laid that foundation of 2 guys that you evaluated, you closed early. And now you're kind of trying to figure out, well, what is the big fish that we want to go after? What is our plan entering the fall for how we want to round out this class? And I think the crux of how different it's become with this July period is a lot of times that was happening now. And now I think with the way that just NIL, the NBA draft, especially for Illinois, how much uncertainty there is in what your future roster is going to be. I don't think that's a decision that Illinois can really make right now in terms of, how to really build this class, because you don't know who you could get back. Will David Mirkovic be back a year from now? Will your backcourt be back a year from now, which is a position that Illinois has prioritized? But you could get Stefan Vaaks and Quentin Coleman back for another year, or maybe you could lose both those guys to the NBA, and then your plans change come next April, or you at least would have a better sense of that as you enter the season and see those guys play. So I think Illinois can afford to be patient, and I also think that a lot of these top prospects can afford to be more patient now, because there is going to be so much money available, and more certainty is going to become available really after next season, or as you get into next season, as opposed to right now, because I think there's just so many moving parts on people's rosters nowadays. So I think it's important, but I think the plan and the approach becomes a little bit less clear this time of year than it did in the past, when this was really the month of like, hey, we're kind of going to build our class and finalize our class. Now that drags out a lot longer, and I think Illinois is kind of a big example of that.
Yeah, I think early in this process is, the summer, even the winter with guys like Kitt and Mason Martin. That's the time to take your developmental guys. Like that's the time that they want to jump on board and just lock up those scholarships, lock up some opportunities at the highest level. And I think that will continue. We'll see some probably more offers go out in the next couple of weeks, and be interesting to see who they offer. But those top 75 guys, really the top 50 guys, especially like the Brady Pettigrews and Navarro Bowman Juniors, like the guys Illinois is going after, those guys should wait till April, right? There's going to be a bigger market for them. They'll know who's the coaches at these places. They'll know what money is available, and they could potentially drive up the price as the market shifts and shifts and narrows and narrows. So I think that's probably what happens is we're seeing more often that the developmental guys, they jump on board in the summer or before it, potentially the early in the fall, but it's the top 50 guys. Those guys can wait, and they should, because the money could increase, the opportunities could change. So it makes sense for all of that. All right, you ready to break down our top summer workout storylines, Kyle?
Let's do it.
All right, I'll let you lead us off. What is your top storyline for summer workouts for Illinois? Sounds like most of the players are back. We should hit on that Stojakovic had his knee scoped here recently, and he's just getting back on the floor. Jake Davis had a knee procedure right after the season. Sounds like he's good to go now. Some other minor things, like Lucas Murillo had a back tweak that happened here recently, but it doesn't sound like too serious. And Stefan Vaaks, got to correct myself. Stefan Vaaks has been playing for the Lithuanian or the Estonian national team. And then, of course, Quentin Coleman's been at all these camps as well. So team's still getting together, but it sounded like this week they should all be together and really get going with Adam Fletcher while the staff is out on the recruiting trail, Kyle. But that's just some things that set the scene of what this team is, but most of them in Champaign now. So what's the top storyline for you?
My top storyline this summer is this backcourt. How does Illinois integrate this backcourt into the rest of its returning core, and how does this new backcourt kind of mesh together? Because that is what ultimately is going to determine this team's ceiling, because that's what Illinois has to replace. You have a lot of knowns, and we'll talk about some of the leaps that the returners can make, and that's certainly going to be important. But let's face it, Illinois has to replace one of the best guards that they've ever had in Keaton Wagler, one of the best individual seasons in program history, who was a huge part of leading them to the Final Four last year. And they have to replace a really, really important player in Kylan Boswell in the backcourt who brought a lot of leadership, was a 3-year starting guard in college basketball. His defensive impact will be something that Illinois really has to replace. But Stefan Vaaks and Quentin Coleman, how do those guys progress as you enter the fall? How do they mesh with the rest of Illinois' team, and how do they mesh together? I think will be two questions that you want to get answers to this summer, and will be really important as you move into the start of the season, because these two guys are really talented. I think both these guys should have high expectations, but you still need to see it. You still need to integrate it within what you want to do. Stefan Vaaks is going to have a lot of responsibility with the ball in his hands, but this summer is going to be a big part of, how comfortable can he get in this offense? How comfortable can he get playing with the Illini's front court in ball screens? Quentin Coleman, where does he fit into all that? How much on-ball usage does he get? Where does he fit in off the ball? How can he make an impact and kind of settle into a role within this ecosystem that Illinois has? I think those are all questions that will be really important, but this backcourt is really going to be the determinant of, can this team get back to a Final Four? They need this backcourt to be really good, and that starts right now.
Yeah, one of my top storylines I had, so I'll just build off of you, is Stefan Vaaks as Keaton Wagler. Like that's huge shoes to fill, even though Vaaks is 2 years older than Keaton, right? He's already 21. So he's got more maturity. He's got more physical body. They're different players, right? I mean, just looking on the surface, Vaaks attempted 8.4 threes per game last year. Wagler was at 5.9. So it's a little bit different a game, but this guy averaged 16 points per game as a college freshman, shot 35% from three, Kyle. Like, this is a proven high major bucket getter, one of the best gets in the transfer portal in all of college basketball, but he's filling some massive shoes. And one of Wagler's superpowers, really his superpowers, is processing, right? His processing, his decision-making at such a young age to be able to do that. Vaaks has some cleaning up to do with some of those things, coming from a poor Providence program right now. Like, that was not a good team last year, and he had some bad habits. But I think the biggest things, and you hit on this in your player outlook, is what's his in-between game? What's his rim game? We know he can shoot the ball. He can create on his own, great size. I mean, it's hard to watch him and not think of some of the things Luka Doncic is able to do at his size and his shot-making ability. But just 3.6 free throws a game. Wagler was at 5.8. Like, Wagler was tough as hell getting to the rim and getting fouled. Wagler rebounded more than 5 a game. Vaaks 2.5. That's bad for a 6'7" guy. And he's a terrible defender. Just an atrocious defender last year. But his offensive skill set in this system, with the spacing around him, Kyle, with the ability potentially to get to the rim when it was all clogged up for him at Providence, like, you are as high as anybody on Vaaks, and I see it, because the offensive skill set is, he could be one of the best offensive players Illinois had under Brad Underwood, which is a high bar, but he's got that kind of skill set. So the other things, the rebounding, just playing serviceable defense, and then the decision-making to help his teammates, to help them out, and to really attack the rim and not settle for contested threes so that his efficiency can go up. All those things are going to be happening. So kind of his acclimation to Illinois and what has made Illinois great in improving Terrence Shannon and Io DeSumo and Keaton Wagler and even Kylan Boswell, getting to the rim, getting to the foul line, playing better defense, rebounding better. All those things are going to be fun to hear, like, how they develop. We can't see it, but those are the areas that are going to happen this offseason.
Yeah, there's so much fine-tuning that still needs to happen for Vaaks to build off of what is already a proven, productive college basketball player, a really talented one. And that is the most exciting thing. That's why I'm so high on him. In my expectations that I wrote for him in my player outlook, they were high, and admittedly they maybe were higher than they should have been, but that's what I think he can be. And that's also the trust I have in this Illinois system of what they can do for a guy of that talent level, of that shot making ability, of that natural playmaking ability, that I think, yes, you have to really kind of smooth that around the edges, and just with more experience. This is a guy that I think you put on the tape and you see him play in ball screens and you see him process the game. Like, he's really good at it. He is naturally gifted. And yet he hasn't necessarily been a true point guard or a primary creator on a team in his basketball career, at least his pro and college basketball career to this point. So that will be a little bit new for him. I think he'll have more responsibility than he's had at any place that he's been so far. So how does he handle that? And, how does he kind of slide into what the Keaton Wagler role was? Because there's so many little things that Keaton Wagler did, to your point, that went beyond his shot making, which was obviously incredible. And some of the things that he did from an offensive standpoint. But yeah, he was a really solid competitive defender. He was a really tough rebounder. He got to the rim. He got to the free throw line really often. He was so good at just taking the singles and the easy plays and making the easy reads within an offense. And I think that's something that Stefan Vaaks didn't necessarily do a great job of. Like, there were some really complex reads that Vaaks did make, and there were some tough plays that Vaaks did make, but sometimes he would settle and he would, some things got difficult for him within the flow of the offense that I think Keaton Wagler just always hit. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he kind of comes along in that. And just tightening up the decision-making as a whole, whether that's turnovers or whether that's shot selection, I think will be big for Vaaks as well, because that's another thing that Keaton very rarely made poor decisions as a passer, very rarely took bad shots. And Vaaks did a little bit of both of those things in a Providence offense and a Providence environment that I think wasn't all that great for him. I think that's where you have some confidence that here at Illinois, you can get the most out of him in all those areas.
His usage was 23.4. Wagler was 25.5. I would imagine that stays about the same for him, right? Just a little bit more of operating with the offense. Here's Brad Underwood speaking with reporters last week about Stefan Vaaks.
Only had a few days with him on the court. Just great vision, very, very good shooter. It was more about him really with Fletch at that time. He's got great strength. He's got great physical size. We'll get dialed in a little more as to strengths and weaknesses as within the framework of what we're doing. But just, his shooting is no nonsense. It's really good. He can really do that. He can shoot it off the bounce. But liked his playmaking and the little bit we saw, and then we've got to continue to pair that with our other players and see how it all comes together.
Yeah, and one thing Brad Underwood talked about with every player, but including Vaaks, is just the time with Fletch. Improving. That's another of their secret weapons. Is Fletch just? It's not just the physical strength, the before and after pictures. We're seeing Merck slim down a little bit. Jake Davis has slimmed his body down, right? Ben Rickhouse changed his body since the time he came here. But it's the mobility, it's the athleticism, it's all the things that can help you become the best player possible. And he's a huge part of that. And I think Stefan Vaaks had some areas he could really improve. So it's going to be a really important summer there. All right, Kyle, what's your next one? Top summer storyline for Illinois.
What does a year two of David Mirkovic look like? I'm fascinated by it. I think there's a ton of potential for what it could be. I think there's a lot of different ways that it could go, and I'm really curious to see ultimately how much responsibility he has, what that leap, I guess the better way to say it would be how big of a leap can David Mirkovic take in year two, because I think it could be a pretty sizable one. But yeah, I'm curious to see, because I do think Stefan Vaaks is going to get a lot of usage. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. I do think this offense primarily will run through a lead guard again in him, but I think there will be more responsibility that David can take. And it isn't out of the realm of possibility that this does become David Mirkovic's team, where he is kind of your primary creator and a guy that you run most things through, especially in crunch time. Like, he could be your true star player here. And I just think there's so many ways that you can use him, even more so than you did last year, and so much growth that he still has. I mean, he had such a great freshman year, but even going through my player outlook on him, like, there's so many things you go down that he can still get better at. He can get a lot better with his efficiency from two, especially against better competition. Like, you look at some of the numbers, we know that he dominated Penn with a 27.21 rebound game at a big game against Colgate. Some of these lesser teams, he was dominant because he's just too big and teams don't have a matchup for him. And he was still impactful in some of Illinois' biggest games, but the efficiency dropped off a little bit. I think trimming him up, adding a little bit to his offensive repertoire can really help him there. I think his in between game too, like 5 to 10 feet, that's an area that he wasn't necessarily as efficient as he was at the rim and from three. I think there's a lot that you can still do there. And then with his decision making and adding more to his plate as an on-ball creator, like I think that's on the table for him, but I think he has a ton of room to grow. One number that really stuck out to me, and I wrote this in the player outlook too, when looking at his season last year, he had 61 drives last year that ended and that led to some type of result, which could involve a variety of things, whether it's attacking a closeout, facing up from the elbow, coming off a ball screen, whatever the case may be. He had a 36.1% turnover rate on those, which is 22 turnovers on 61 drives. And I think that kind of matches the eye test, right? Of like when he was stationary, when he could read the floor, he was really good. When he put the ball on the floor, when he was in motion, that's where he got really sped up, and the decision-making could wane. The ball handling needs to be tightened up. Like if he can drop that number down, get better as a processor and as a decision maker when on the move, that's where I think you could unlock like a Point Mirkovic type of situation. So there's still so much for him. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, and I still don't know if is 38% from three going to happen again. Like he proved himself as a shooter last year, and he's been a good shooter all his life. That could dip. Like if it's 35 or 36%, that wouldn't surprise me. I hope it doesn't go below like 33, but he's a good shooter that people are going to have to respect. But I agree. That's why that efficiency in the paint has to increase for him. And you hope that you just get a little bit more explosive so he can finish a little bit better, gets a little bit stronger as he's with Fletch, just to be able to shield off those things. But yeah, I mean, stronger with the ball is a huge thing, but he's in line for a big leap. And no one around the program is hiding it. Like he could end up being their highest draft pick. But I do think, Kyle, one thing we probably don't talk about enough is he's got to show a little bit more defensively to be able to be that draft pick. No one's going to draft David Mirkovic in the top 20 because of his defense, but they might not draft him because of it. Right. Like, so that's where he has to take a step, be a little bit better. I think he did as the season went along, became more serviceable, a little bit better on that end. He's a phenomenal rebounder. But statistic wise, I was kind of thinking like, how many Big Ten freshman of the year caliber players come back for a second year anymore? It doesn't happen all that often. So I went to StatHead. I searched like who's averaged 13 or 8 points or 13 points, 8 rebounds as a freshman in the Big Ten, and then came back for another year. The two most recent examples are Trace Jackson Davis and Kofi Coburn. Trace Jackson Davis is a freshman, 13.5 points, 8.4 rebounds, really close to David. His next year, he averaged 19 points and 9 rebounds. Kofi is a freshman, 13.3 points, 8.8 rebounds. Next year went to 17.7 points, 9.5 rebounds. Right now, I would argue those guys didn't have as much talent around them as David Mirkovic will have as a sophomore. David obviously can shoot threes. These guys didn't shoot threes. Different games. But 18 and 9 does not seem outside the realm of possibility for me. And from everything I've heard, Illinois loves what he has done this offseason. The fact that he stayed in Champaign and did not go play for the Montenegrin national team, I think shows how committed he is to Illinois and making that leap individually himself. And now he's got to be a leader of the team as well. So I couldn't be higher on Merck's second year. You know he's going to get better. But yeah, it's the degrees and just the little areas that he can improve. He's going to be one of the best players in the country, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think he will. I think he certainly is probably Illinois' best chance of being a first-team All-Big Ten guy, although in my opinion, I think Stefan Vaaks could get there as well. But yeah, I think to all the things you said and just as we've talked about, like this is a guy who was one of the best freshmen in the Big Ten last year. And it was a really loaded freshman class nationally, but he, in terms of his impact and what he did for a Final Four team, and he was second best player on Illinois' Final Four team last year behind another freshman who I think outshined him and what his season was. Because if you didn't have the Keaton Wagler story and the season that he had, which was so unprecedented, like we'd be talking about David Mirkovic's freshman season as being one of the more impressive freshman seasons that Illinois has had.
Well, and we
a long time.
We compared him to Dexter Fowler, right? Because
Yeah.
when he played well, Illinois seemed unbeatable. When he struggled, and there were some times he struggled, Illinois didn't really seem to have a chance. So, like, he is so important to everything they do, despite having all these guards, because they don't have another player like him. Like, Tomislav Ivicic is a phenomenal Big Ten center, but he's not quite what David Mirkovic is on the glass and just the energy he brings. And to be honest with you, David was just a more consistent three-point shooter last year. So Illinois got plenty of talent in that front court. I'm not saying they don't, but like David, when he didn't play well, like it was felt.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for that reason, he's your most important player entering this year too, I think, especially with how much Illinois is going to put on his plate. He needs to be good. He needs to be consistent. And he does need to take jumps in all those areas that we talked about. But I'm fascinated as much as I am with the individual growth that David can make and what that leap could look like for him. Some of the different buttons that Illinois pushes with him this year that maybe they didn't push as much last year because you had Keaton Wagler and it became such a Keaton Wagler oriented team. Like, I think there's just so many possibilities that we'll get to see more of this year. And I think that'll dictate a lot too of what his season could look like. And it wouldn't surprise me if you get into this season and David Mirkovic really is a guy that you're triggering most of your offense through and is really kind of carrying a big load for you.
I was going to say, especially when Boswell was out, we saw so much of Point Merck.
Yeah.
Like, do you trust Quentin Coleman enough in that role? I wouldn't trust as good as he is in everything else. Like Andrei Stojakovic, I'm not counting in that role. Like the next two guys I'd probably trust the most with the ball in their hands are David Mirkovic and Tomislav Ivicic. And Merck obviously is a little bit more mobile. So I don't know if I'm going to say it's going to be full-blown Point Merck, but it's an option, Kyle, and it's probably a higher option than it was last year.
It's an option, and it is a really deadly option because of all the possibilities. Like, you can run some inverted stuff with your guards where you have Merck as a 6'9" ball handler, and then you have Vaaks or Coleman shooting, coming and setting a screen. We've seen how much Illinois has like to weaponize their guards as screeners. I think that could get really dangerous if you have Merck then as a ball handler. You could implement some more high-low stuff with two really good passers and Merck and Tommy together, and what that could look like. You could run some big-on-big action on the perimeter, a la that Danny Wolf led Golden team, that Michigan that was unstoppable. Like, there's just, if you have a guy with that skill set, if he can tighten up some of the on the move processing and the ball handling and getting tighter with some of that stuff, like that's a matchup that, opposing coaches will look at like, I don't know how we stop this. So it's pretty exciting if you could tap into that a little bit more.
Yeah, here's what Brad Underwood had to say about Merck last week.
I think the one thing with Merck is just physically, Fletch does a great job of improving verticals, getting guys more athletic, getting guys leaned up, more comfortable and dialed in with what body weight should be. And then it's just the confidence that goes with that, and it's the old cliche I've used a million times. The best thing about freshmen is they become sophomores. You see the confidence in that, that comes with experience. Then you start putting the physical changes that he's made. We've found a body weight that's very comfortable for him. Now it's just adding muscle, it's adding strength, and I think you pair that with confidence, you're gonna have one of the best players in the country.
There you go. Very high on David Mirkovic entering year 2. All right, Kyle, my next one, kind of a big topic heading into last year, and it should be again this year, because I don't know if by the skill sets and talent, Illinois got any better defensively. Now, they got way better as the season went along defensively. The metrics are much better in the tournament. Illinois' defense was very good, but you lost Kylan Boswell. You lost Ben Hummerkaus, which I would say are 2 or 3 best individual defenders. I think Wagler was probably a plus defensively for you. You add Vaaks, who's a bad defender. Quentin Coleman, I think, can be a good defender, but he is slender, right? You've got Zvonimir Ivicic coming back, but David Mirkovic, I wouldn't say, is really a plus defender at this point. Jake Davis is limited, obviously. So who can be reliable on defense? I think Andrei Stojakovic is the answer. He's got to be your A1 stopper now, but you're counting on Quentin Coleman to take a big leap and be a solid defender for you. You're counting on Vaaks to at least be serviceable and way better than he was last year, but you're also counting on the Ivicic twins to be better than they were last year. So just kind of fascinated. And it seems like Brad Underwood wants to continue to be more aggressive. I'll play a clip here in a moment, Kyle, about just a little bit more intensity on that end. So I don't know in year 2 if Cam Crocker makes big changes or if he figured out kind of what this roster can do. That's what's nice is you have this roster mostly back from last year, but that's still the biggest question mark about this team going into next year is defense. And I think it's really important, more so in the offensive end, because I think the talent will shine at some point and the system will shine at some point, is defensively in year 2 under Cam Crocker, after probably losing defensive talent. How do you take a step forward?
Yeah, and for sure. And I think as we talked about going into last year, like that is going to be one of the biggest X factors of what this team can be. It's just hard, as we've seen. And, every time the NCAA tournament comes around, the stats get put up that no team that hasn't been in the top 30 or whatever the number is in both offense and defense have won a national title, whatever the case may be. Like you need to be well-rounded. And I think we know that this offense is going to be one of the best in the country. It should be. But last year, the reason that Illinois was able to make the Final Four and go on the run they did was their defense really took off in the NCAA tournament and was good enough to help them get there to pair with that offense. That needs to happen again. And there are a lot of question marks, even more so than with last year's roster in terms of defensive ability. Now, I think you can look at the pessimistic angle of, well, I think we got worse personnel-wise defensively, and there's some big questions about what Vaaks can be, and losing Boswell, losing Benham Rickhouse. How do we replace that? And then there is the optimistic side of things as well of, okay, well, it's year 2 under Cam Crocker. We have 5 guys back that are more comfortable, that have worked with him. They did find something in the NCAA tournament last year that worked. Now you can build off that with a lot of the same guys coming back. So I think there are 2 sides to it, but I think the individual development of guys is still ultimately going to be the biggest determining factor there. Can Andre Stojakovic be a stopper on the perimeter that you can put on an opposing team's best player and feel really good about it, like Kylan Boswell was most times, especially when he wasn't battling the injury or coming back from the injury? Can you trust Quentin Coleman with difficult defensive assignments on pretty good Big Ten high major guards? Like, I don't think you want to put him in a position where he's got to guard superstars, but you need him to be impactful. He's probably going to be your second best perimeter guy. How much can you trust him? Can Stefan Vaaks be good enough to not minimize the offensive value that he's going to bring you? Like, you don't want to be put in a situation late in games where you have to think about taking Stefan Vaaks off the floor because teams are hunting him. And if he defends like he did at Providence last year, that is a decision that will be in Brad Underwood's mind. So you got to get him away from that. And then your bigs, too, are such an important part of this defensive foundation. Both the Ivicic twins are such huge pieces of that because Illinois wants to funnel everything to those guys and to that side. And David Mirkovic being able to keep him on the floor, making him a little bit more switchable, a little bit more diverse in the matchups that he can handle. Like, it's just, you go down the list individually, the development of all these guys, I think more than anything schematically or anything that Cam Crocker necessarily can do, that's what's going to dictate, can this defense be good enough? Can it be to the level that it was late last season that helped them reach the Final Four?
Listen, if Stefan Vaaks is anywhere near the level of this guy offensively, I'll take it no matter what the defense is. But you just don't want Darius Acuff level defense out there, right? Like that's just, hey, this guy scores, but he gives everything back. Of course, Darius Acuff had one of the best freshman seasons we've seen and a loaded freshman year and became a lottery pick. So still led his team to the Sweet 16, but to get to a Final Four, going to have to be a little bit better than that. Here's Brad Underwood. What he had to say about defense. We'll react to it, Kyle.
Got to get better. I think that's the biggest thing. We should be an elite shot blocking team. We got great size. We're bigger than we were last year. We've got to find the aggressive button a little more when it comes to being in some passing lanes, but most importantly, protecting the rim, blocking shots. I think that this team can be very good in that area. I think that it goes hand in hand with, we've got to become an elite defensive rebounding team so we can get out and run. But I love our size, and we're just trying to tweak and change a few things more in mentality and yes, some in scheme, but I think defensively we got a chance to be really special.
What mentality tweaks are you seeking?
Aggressiveness. I think that it's still kind of the same concepts we've had, but we've just got to do it more with more assertion, with more tenacity, with more emphasis on my part in terms of trying to create a steal or two and blocking more shots. And Z was one of the tops in the country, but it can't just be him. It's got to be everybody.
Kyle, you heard some aggression, getting into passing lanes, forcing more turnovers. We heard that at this time last year too. And Illinois ended up being last in the country in defensive turnover percentage. So count me as I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. I do think what he was talking about mindset-wise, I think that's what seemed to click with them in the NCAA tournament is they knew they had to defend. Andrej Stojakovic knew, I want to make the NBA and I want to make a big impact on this team and steal some minutes from Jake Davis because that was a thing late in the year. Like, I have to be great defensively, and he changed the game against Bennett Sturts in Iowa to help Illinois get to the Elite Eight or get to the Final Four and win that Elite Eight game. So I think the experience you have, your age is huge here, but you are counting on, I think, Quentin Coleman and Lucas Murillo to make impacts defensively, because Quentin's going to be one of the quicker guys chasing some good guards, chasing potentially some shooters. I would imagine Jake Davis does a lot of that too. Maybe Fox is doing some of that, but he's going to have to guard some good league guards at some point, along with Andrej Stojakovic and Lucas Murillo with that length and size. I would imagine you want him to play some good defense too. So, like, I think this team's going to be able to block shots. I think they're going to be able to rebound. What do you make of that aggressive talk? Because I just don't know if Illinois is going to be that team forcing a bunch of turnovers. As much as I know Brad Underwood would like to do that, I just don't think the personnel is there outside of Stojakovic and maybe Quentin Coleman.
Yeah, if you set the over-under at 359th and a half for defensive turnover rate, I think I'm taking the under again. They've been under the last 3 years. They were last year, 360th in 2025, 360th in 2024. We did hear the same thing last year, and it didn't necessarily happen, and I just don't think that's what best suits this roster or something that Illinois is really going to end up emphasizing, because it's
the roster they recruited.
Yeah, it's not the roster they recruited, and also, like, say what you want about some of the defensive questions we've had, but the formula they've had, it's a high floor. Like, it's a high floor defensive formula. When you have the size that Illinois has, but not necessarily the athleticism, the lateral quickness, like, I think you put yourself in more harm than the potential benefits would be of trying to become a havoc-wreaking, turnover-forcing team. I think you want to stick with the main formula that worked for you down the stretch last year. But I think when you talk about aggressiveness defensively, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, we're going to force a bunch of steals, or, oh, we're going to jump a bunch of passing lanes and create a bunch of turnovers. I think, to your point, it can look a lot like it did in the NCAA tournament last year for Illinois, where there's just more aggressiveness and intensity in the mindset and in the way that guys guarded individually, and the movement and the way that Illinois covered the floor. Like, it felt like there was a shift from the regular season to that NCAA tournament run defensively in aggressiveness, without the steal numbers taking a huge step forward. I think that's more so what Brad is getting at, and I think that's what more so you need to have with this team to best maximize it, because you don't have the elite physical athletes, the guys that are going to be causing so much havoc defensively. What you do have is a lot of size and a lot of guys that I think can be good defenders if that mental part of it clicks for them and is consistent for them. And that's what I think happened towards the end of last season, and what you need from this roster, because you kind of need for this team to be a national title contender, you kind of need to overperform the defensive talent. Like, and I think that's what Illinois did really well last year, was the sum of the parts, and the way it ended up coming together was better than the individual defenders you have. That's kind of the formula for Illinois.
Yeah, because I would say 2024, even when you made the Elite Eight, and 2025, and I think really through the Big Ten tournament last year, Illinois had just kind of been a program that's like, we're going to outscore people. right? Like, and that's kind of how they were built, but their mindset was also that way, right? Like UCLA, we're just going to try and outscore them. Michigan State, you go in there and don't worry as much about defense. Wisconsin games, you just felt like, we'll figure it. We'll outscore them at the end. When the NCAA tournament came along, like VCU holding them to 55, the Houston game is the one, right? Like that was, I don't see either of the last two teams having that game, including the Terrence Shannon team. Like maybe Terrence carries you to win because he's a heroic player at that point, but like I just don't see them winning that way. And then Iowa, the last 15 minutes, what they were able to do to Bennett Sturts and that Hawkeyes team that was rolling at that point, I just don't see those other teams doing that. So if you can carry over that mentality that, hey, we can win with our defense too, I think that's kind of what Brad Underwood is talking about. All right, Kyle, we got one or two more here. What do you got?
I think the freshman is one, and that's always in summer. And I think, we can talk about Quentin Coleman a little bit, but I think more so beyond Quentin Coleman and really beyond Lucas Murillo, like, are there any of those other freshmen that emerge as legitimate rotational options for Illinois? And that's not to say that, there's going to be a guy that plays in 38 games and, ultimately emerges as a fixture of your rotation. Maybe that happens. I do think, as we've talked about, like Brad Underwood usually goes 8 deep for the most part, especially as you get into the season. But I think beyond the two guys that we expect, like both for this season and as you talk about retention into the future, like which of those guys emerge? Ethan Brown, somebody that I know Illinois is really high on, and I think his offensive skill set really fits into what Illinois wants to do. Can he progress physically? Can he become somebody that wins kind of that ninth man in the rotation role and gives you a little bit of depth in the backcourt, which is kind of the one area that I think Illinois is lacking a little bit. How does Xavier Zenz fit in, who I think you look at his physical makeup, and that looks like a guy who could contribute in the Big Ten, but how does he progress, and does his role, is there a role for him somewhere this year, but can you get him to a point where you feel like he's kind of one of the next wing that can be really good for Illinois moving forward? And Lincoln Williams too, like that's a different piece. That's a guy that I think could help this team in certain ways potentially, but as you kind of start to develop him, and Landon Davis too, of course, like it just in general, I think the freshmen that we don't necessarily expect to be key fixtures of this team, how do they develop? What are their first impressions like this summer? And what, if anything, could those guys contribute to next season's team will be one that I'm monitoring.
Yeah, here's Brad Underwood talking about the freshmen as a whole.
Right. I think they've all had their days. I think they've all been I've been impressed with their, like I said, their retention and their carryover. They're all extremely competitive. This group has a real bite to it. This freshman group, they've got grit. They're maybe a little different than last year's group in terms of the competitive spirit. They want to do the right things, and they're very competitive. There's a lot of talking, a lot of chirping going on, which is a good sign, and I'm taking that as a real positive right now.
That is interesting how he compared it to last year's group, when last year's group was David Mirkovich, Keaton Wilder. I know Brandon Lee was a part of that, Blake Fabemi, but it seems like he likes the mindset of these guys. I don't know. You get a guy like Keaton Wilder, and everyone's like, well, maybe Xavier Zenz or Ethan Brown or Lincoln Williams can be this breakthrough out of nowhere. I think Quentin Coleman and Lucas Murillo are likely the guys to make the biggest impact. But I think it's Ethan Brown because he's got the size, he's got explosiveness, and he can score. And those are things they care about. Lincoln Williams is really interesting because he's a defender. Like, they just don't have another athlete like that. And they're recruiting a kid named Jayon Connor in the class of 2027. That's really interesting to me because he looks like a bigger Ty Rodgers, a guy who doesn't shoot it all that well, but does have an athleticism that Illinois hasn't had. So the fact that they're starting to try and add another guy like that, I think is really interesting. But I just don't know if there's enough offense there to count on a big role. So if there is a guy who averages 10, 12 minutes out of these guys, I would imagine Ethan Brown, but I still think it's going to be an 8-man rotation. And most of these guys are going to be on the outside looking in and developing for the next year. But Kyle, is there anybody else you bet on? Is it Xavier Zenz? What do you think?
No, I think I'm with you. I think if there was a guy that would emerge and maybe contribute this year more than we think going into the season, I think my best bet would be Ethan Brown, just because this is an offensive-oriented team, right? And this is a team that values that more than anything. They value the spacing, they value the decision-making, the ability to pass and make decisions with the ball in your hands, and they value floor spacing and elite shooting. And I think Ethan Brown gives you that. While it obviously will still take a lot of time for him to develop as a player, and I think there's a lot of defensive question marks for him, especially as a freshman. Like, if there's a guy that I think could build trust with this staff and find his way on the floor, I would probably bet him more than anybody else. I am curious about Lincoln Williams, because
You're Lincoln Williams curious. I like it.
Yeah, I'm Lincoln Williams curious, because he is just so different than anything Illinois has. And he does theoretically, he fills a major weakness that I think this rotation will have. I just don't know. Like, he's going to have to be able to make shots, I think, to be able to be trusted on the floor. And I just think there's so much offensive development that he has to have. I think this staff has shown they're not really willing to sacrifice offense and spacing and maximizing what their offense can be to add defense or athleticism or what that might be, even in a smaller role. Like, I think that's why we saw Brandon Lee early last year, got a couple opportunities, and he just wasn't really ready to play at the Big Ten level offensively. And so you really didn't see him as we got into Big Ten play as much anymore. And part of that too, of course, was that I think Illinois' rotation was established. But like, I think this staff values that more than anything. But I do think that there could be certain games where Lincoln Williams could give you something a little bit different. I wonder if that ever comes to play or not. But yeah, I would imagine it probably stays at the 8-man rotation that we expect for the most part. And we'll see if it progresses at all from there.
All right. I got one more, and you can say whatever you want after that. We haven't mentioned the Ivisic twins that much. Probably the best center rotation in the country heading into the year. What if they can shoot again? Like, what if the Ivisic twins both shoot 35+% from three as 23-year-olds who are professional basketball players? Like, what if that is standing next to David Mirkovic and Stefan Vaaks and Quentin Coleman and Jake Davis and Andrei Stojakovic? Like, they were really good last year. I don't think they were great until Tommy got into the NCAA tournament. And it was like, oh, there's Tommy. And Tommy added to his game. Like, his low post game was great. But at the end of the day, that guy stretches the floor at an elite level, but it was so inconsistent last year. And Zvonimir just dropped off a cliff after shooting so well early in the year, just was non-shooter. He shot the ball, but it never went in. What if those guys can shoot again? Because Zvonimir changes them defensively, changes them with that kind of lob threat at the rim. Tommy, we saw him progress as a back to the basket, finish at the rim kind of guy, gets to the free throw line. It did well there, but what if he shoots 37% from three? Like, that's what goes in my mind. It's like, oh, those guys didn't have great offensive years. What if they have great offensive years?
Yeah, that could be as deadly of a big man rotation as you can find. And I mean, both those guys progressed a ton with their 2-point efficiency last year, but both really took a dip from three. And so you didn't necessarily see it pay off in terms of a big offensive leap. And obviously Tommy had a lot that went on that I think prevented him from having the season that I think he was capable of having. I think we've talked about it enough, but like, if Tomislav Ivisic doesn't have to have any disruption heading into the season and can have a full offseason with the full roster here, working with David Mirkovic, that's another thing. Like, entering last year, we talk about how Tomislav missed some time early in the season and never really got integrated, but also David didn't show up until the fall. And so you didn't really have that meshing between your front court. Now you have a year of experience under the belt where I think Tommy will have a lot more comfort in what his role is going to be and hopefully won't have to deal with any more health issues. That was one of the best centers in the Big Ten 2 years ago and was still probably a top 5-ish center last year, even in a down year.
Put Tommy on Minnesota. What's he averaging? 18 and 8?
Yeah. Like, he has that ability.
We don't think about him like that, but I just, that's the talent Illinois has. But you put Tommy on like a bad team or subpar Big Ten team, I think he's averaging like 17-8 or 18-8.
Yeah, if he makes threes like he's capable of making them, like there could be a pretty big offensive leap there if you pair that with the low post efficiency. You pair that with his finishing, and Z, like I think
Up
on the
to
whole
260,
last year,
by the way. Z up to
yeah, good
260,
point.
Brett.
Yeah, 260. I think that's a big thing that we've talked about a lot is just continuing to add to his strength base and being a little bit more physical. And I'll have a player outlook for him that I'm finishing up today that we'll talk about, what he can do from that standpoint and how I think his production kind of waned against some of the top front courts last year. But yeah, he shot 28% from three, finished the year 3 for 31 from three to close last season. He also led the country in 2-point percentage, had 41 dunks last year, took a huge step forward from 59% from two to 83% from two. If you pair that with the shooter that he's capable of being, you could have an unbelievable backup center that is just a matchup nightmare for teams that can just provide you a lot more versatility in the way that you can use him offensively. Because let's face it, for as much of a vertical threat as he turned into down the stretch of last season, teams didn't respect his shot coming down the stretch in the NCAA tournament. He had no confidence with it. If he can get that back and pair that with everything that he showed as a lob threat, playing out of the dunker spot, and everything that he provides defensively, like that's a center that could probably start for most teams in college basketball, and you will have come off your bench. And I think the other thing I'll throw in too, just real quick too, is could we see a little bit more double Ivicic this year? That's something that I'll be monitoring too, because you don't have a true backup four. When David Mirkovic is off the floor, I think Illinois could go small, but I also think you could see a little bit more of those two playing together. I think that'll take growth from both those guys. I think Z is going to have to be able to punish mismatches a little bit better when teams put their fours on him. I think he's going to have to move a little bit better. But they played 2.6 minutes a game together last year. I think that could increase to five plus potentially this year.
I know he had the moment against VCU that we'll never forget with that dunk, but pretty much a non-factor in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think that's going to be the case. Again, he didn't play well in the NCAA tournament with his two previous teams either. But you just went through this guy. He only had 14 points in 6 NCAA tournament games. He had 11 rebounds and 5 block shots. Like that needs to be better. Like, and if it is, man, he's such an X factor.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's so unique, and that skill set, I mean, even more than Tommy. And I think Tommy is a little bit more of a well-rounded player, but like in terms of the physical tools and the upside, like Z is just a different player. And it's just, so if he can put all of it together, which I think we've seen flashes of so many different things from Z, the college basketball player, and it doesn't feel like they've ever all come together. And that's what I think you can hope. But it doesn't have to be all season, but I think at some point this season, you hope in his final college season, 23 years old, like, can we get all of these tantalizing skills and put them all together and see what that looks like in Zvonimir Ivicic? Because if you do, that is a really scary player and probably an NBA draft pick as well.
It's amazing. Yeah, like 6 NBA draft picks, potential picks on this team. All right, Kyle, you got any more? Any final thoughts?
I think one other thing I'm curious about, because it's something that Brad mentioned, was does this offense play a little faster this year? Like I'm curious about it because you look at last year and it was very intentional with the change that Illinois made. Like this was an Illinois team under Brad Underwood that had consistently ranked in the top 50 in tempo, was one of the faster playing teams. And last year, I think it was very intentional with Keaton Wagler in slowing it down and playing in the half court. I think that will stay the same with Stefan Vaaks and with David Mirkovic. I think that's just what the strength of this roster is. But can this team create a little bit more in transition this year? I think that is a realistic goal because I do think you have the personnel with Quentin Coleman, who I think is really comfortable doing that. Andrei Stojakovic, who I think you can tap into his game a little bit more. He was really good in transition in the limited opportunities he had last year. I think there is a little bit more pace to Stefan Vaaks' game than there was Keaton Wagler. Z, we saw his ability to run the floor, especially in the NCAA tournament. And David Mirkovic, too, a guy that early in the season last year we saw really grab and go on the defensive glass a lot. And then we didn't see that as much down the stretch of the season because it became such a Keaton Wagler oriented team. You wanted the ball in Keaton's hands. You really wanted to slow it down and allow him to kind of trigger everything offensively. I think you could see David create a little bit more in transition, take the ball and go. I think you could see a little bit more pace to this team this year. How much that is, I don't know. I don't think we're going to get back to the blazing tempo Brad Underwood teams that we saw before last year. But I think, especially in transition, I think that there is a little bit more that Illinois can create there. It's been pretty much a non-existent transition offense for Illinois the last 2 years. I think you could see a little bit more from this roster from that standpoint. I'll be interested to see how that kind of comes along.
Yeah, you hit on it, but I was going to be like, who are the guys? Who are the guys that do that? I do think Stefan Vaaks, because of his size, if he grabs a rebound, like I wouldn't mind him looking because he could just toss it over a defender and find Z running the floor or something like that. But I do think you're right. I think Quentin Coleman, with the way he rebounds the ball, is somebody who can really push that. Andre's always got to be in that mode. Like yep. if he's whatever rebounds happening, he's got to sprint up the court because he's just so dangerous. He's got some Terrence Shannon qualities when he does it. So I don't know if he's the one pushing it, but he's got to be the guy running the court to try and be that secondary playmaker. And I'm with you with David. Like David, I'm fine with him pushing the pace, but there's going to be a little bit of nervousness when he does it because what does he do with the ball? Does he handle the ball well? But even if it's just a Kevin Love outlet pass, right? Like I think that's where he can really key it, and maybe Stojakovic or Coleman are the guys to go to. So I agree with that because like Brad talks about this tempo, but by the turning off, like revving down the engine last year, it really opened up things for Keaton Wagler. He just really did so well at that pace where the game can come to him. He can kind of dictate everything, and the pace he plays with is such a strength of his. I would agree that Stefan Vaaks is probably built more that way too, but that'll be fascinating to watch as well. I do have a few Jason Jaxtis comments here. People saying he could be a big wild card. I still think he's just the emergency big man. If somebody gets a couple guys get in foul trouble, like if Merck and Tommy both get in foul trouble, maybe this guy can go out there and get minutes. It is great that he's on the court again, right? After the health scare he had with the blood clot in his shoulder, which is really scary. He had a rib removed with all that thoracic outlet surgery. That's a scary surgery, but to see him back on the court is huge. And he gets another year with Fletch, which is really, really important. Big, strong, can finish at the rim. He's going to rebound. We have 9 rebounds in one of those non-con games last year. So that's a nice fourth big to be able to throw in there, Kyle. Like I would imagine, not going to be consistent minutes with the 3 guys that are in front of him. But yeah, when your 10th or 11th guy is big and physical like him, it's not a bad guy to have.
Yeah, and look, it's his 3rd year now in this program, and I think that we've already seen him really, really grow physically, at a lot of strength, and that's obviously been a big project for Illinois since he came. But it does not hurt to have that kind of depth because, well, I think when Illinois is fully healthy and fully rolling, like I do think it's probably going to be limited to the Ivisic twins and David Mirkovic as true bigs. Maybe Jason Jaxtis here and there can crack the rotation a little bit, but you do need that depth in case, hey, Thomas Ivisic has battled some health issues. Maybe he misses some games. Maybe somebody gets hurt. Maybe there is major foul trouble in a game. Like to be able to have a guy that you feel comfortable with being on the floor can give you 5 to 6 minutes that are serviceable, that he can battle defensively, can rebound. He's not going to hurt you. I think that's kind of what you hope for from Jaxtis this year. I think long-term, continuing to add to his offensive skill set, he's got to be a floor spacer if he wants to play in these lineups. Like that's something that he was as a prospect, and the jumper hasn't quite been there, and has some, it's a little unorthodox, and it's changed a little bit since high school. So getting that back to a place where he can be a legitimate floor spacing threat as you look long term of how can Jason Jaxtis help, like that's where I think it comes down to, because I think he's got a nice floor right now in terms of what he gives you defensively and on the glass. And I think you feel like if you need to put him in there for 5 minutes, you should feel pretty decent about that in his 3rd year now.
Yeah, I think that's his role this year. And then next offseason's huge for him because they're going to lose both the Ivisic twins, we think, and David Mirkovic could be an NBA draft pick. So that's where they're going to have a lot of holes to fill, and he's going to have to prove it throughout this year that he's a guy they can rely on in that rotation. I think we covered it all. I think we mentioned everybody, but Blake Fagbemi. We kind of didn't mention him, but like that's about it. I think we covered it all. And Kyle continues to put out these player outlooks, which are phenomenal reads. Go check those out at Illini Inquirer. If you're not a VIP member, go check that out. We'll do a recruiting podcast at some point. Want to see if they make some offers. But if you want to check out some targets to watch, I have a piece on that up at Illini Inquirer right now as well. But Kyle, thank you, buddy. It's good to talk some Illini hoops in the middle of this hot July.
Absolutely, man. Glad to get back into basketball mode after a week of not being in that. So it was great. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you to everybody for watching the Illini Inquirer podcast live on our YouTube channel. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell. If you're just listening on the podcast, follow us, rate us, review us. We appreciate that. But for Kyle Tausk, I'm Jeremy Werner. It's good to be back, but we'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.
Bye, everybody.